I think I just played the best chess game of my life. Game Review gave this game a 99.2 accuracy and 5 brilliant moves. The game comes from a US Team Chess League match against New Mexico. I'm playing for South Carolina on board number 2 against Java Blanca. I opened the game here with pawn to e4, and my opponent responds with the Sicilian defense. After c5, we get knight f3, d6, d4, and then cd, knight takes d4, knight f6, attacking my pawn on e4, and I defend with knight c3. Now pawn to a6, the knight orf, so we're playing just super sharp chess. I play bishop to g5, we get e6, and now pawn to f4, bishop e7. I play queen f3, which is the standard response against bishop e7. I don't really know why, but it is what all of the opening books recommend. We get queen c7, I go ahead and castle queenside, and now knight to d7. I play pawn to g4, which is the theoretical move, and then my opponent responds with pawn to b5. At this point, I trade on f6 so that I can continue to push my pawn that was blocked by the bishop. Pawn to g5, pushing the knight back to d7. And now pawn to f5. This is all theoretical. It's all in the chess.com Explorer, and it's a daily chess game, so we can both use the Explorer. Neither of us is thinking for ourselves until this point in the game. Now my opponent plays knight to c5, which is again a theoretical move, although I think the move castles is probably better. It's not the most popular move in the database, but it has a decent score and I cannot see a way to break it down. Everything else, I think, gives me pretty good attacking chances. So here after f5, we get that knight c5 move, pawn to f6. This is a very big pawn on f6, and even if this position has been played in Grandmaster play, I don't think it can be recommended for black. So pawn takes on f6, pawn takes on f6, the bishop falls back to f8, rook to g1. I love having this rook on the open g file, and now pawn to h5 for my opponent. Again, this is all theory, as is the move rook to g7. After this, though, we are going to be playing on our own. Big question here, can black take this rook on g7? The answer is no. After bishop takes g7, pawn takes g7, the rook needs to move and needs to stop the pawn from queening, so rook g8, but then knight takes b5 is an excellent move and a crushing move. You can really play with either knight, but this is the most natural play. After pawn takes, knight takes, d6 is falling, and then f7 is a problem as well. The black position is absolutely collapsing. So my opponent does not take the rook on g7, but now what should black play? Probably at this point, the best move, according to the engine, is pawn to b4. And things end up being super sharp, but we're not getting into that particular variation, which has a lot of Grandmaster games. Instead, my opponent plays rook to h6. Now, this is not a good move, unfortunately, for my opponent, but it's kind of hard to believe that this move is already the losing move in the game. And it's really the only mistake my opponent makes in this particular game. I think the big problem with rook to h6 is it loses a tempo in a position that is way too sharp to ever lose a tempo. I think that my opponent's idea is that maybe black can play bishop takes, pawn takes, and then rook to g6 at some point, but that move is just never working. In fact, this is the one moment I missed a really good opportunity in the game. I could have played here knight takes on b5, and then after pawn takes b5, knight takes b5, I'm actually winning if the queen moves, and then I play rook to g8, pinning that bishop on f8, taking advantage of the fact that the rook on h8 just moved to h6, and the attack here on this d6 pawn is deadly because the bishop is pinned on f8. So the knight could fall back, and then a move like queen c3 intending to come in here is evidently crushing. To be fair, this isn't entirely obvious, and the move that I played after rook h6 is also really good. I played the move bishop to h3. I just love bringing all of my pieces into the attack, and after bishop h3, Obviously, this rook has the potential to get involved, and the bishop is looking great, and maybe I can take on e6 at some point. So this move is also like +3. It's not as forcing as knight takes b5, but it's really, really good as well. In the game, after bishop h3, my opponent plays pawn to b4. By the way, I should note what would have happened if my opponent tried to take on g7 now, which is really the only point of rook h6. But after bishop takes g7, pawn takes rook to g6. In this position, unfortunately, having the rook on g6 instead of g8 doesn't really help. In fact, it's still very good and winning to take on b5, but you can also just play queen takes h5, because if the rook captures the pawn, this fork would then win the rook on g7. So this is not working at all for my opponent. So b4 attacks my knight here on c3. I thought for a little while and didn't really calculate anything, but I figured it has to be good. I must be able to leap forward into the center. And I play knight d5. And this is the best move in this position. The knight sacrifice, even while I have this rook on g7 hanging, opens up the e file, and that is going to be a crushing problem for black. So knight d5. This move is so strong, black is not going to be able to survive taking the knight, but everything else is bad as well. So black does take this knight. I simply take back, and now we have an open e-file to work with against the black king. Now these bishops are in a standoff, so it makes sense that my opponent plays bishop takes h3. I can just play queen takes h3, and that's very good here because black cannot castle and get out of the attack because I do control this square. But the more forcing move and more natural move is rook to e1 check. So I throw this move in here. It is possible to play bishop back to e6, retreating that bishop that just captured on h3, but black is all pinned up, and I can take here because you cannot defend with the pawn on f7, right? This pawn is always pinned to the queen, so blocking on e6 doesn't help. After rook e1 check, my opponent plays king to d8. Now, at this point, I could go ahead and throw in a check here. And there's a famous saying in check, Patzer sees check, Patzer gives check, where Patzer is a new player. New players are very tempted by checks, but if I give this check, I just help my opponent to get away. Instead, in this position, I play queen takes h3. I've got this seat belt across the black king, holding the king in place. And in fact, with the queen and the rook, the black king is stuck. There's nowhere for the king to go, which means a check would be deadly. And I do have a check in the position. Knight to c6 check. And this check is a massive, massive threat. Black must deal with the threat of knight c6 check when the only way out of checkmate would be to give up the queen for the knight. So the most natural move which my opponent plays is queen d7. But another question is, what about knight d7 here, which blocks the queen so that the king can run over here? In this position, there are many, many wins. Like you can just throw the knight check in here and then take this pawn on f7. When you take this pawn, you have sacrificed a piece, but you have so much pressure that it's an absolutely overwhelming attack. You can also just take on f7 right away with the rook, and you can play rook g8. White has an easily winning attack at the cost of just a piece here. Instead, though, after queen d7, which is played in the game, the king can run this way, and black is offering a queen trade, and white still has a rook hanging in this position. So this seems like it might actually be a problem for white. And this was what I spent all of my time calculating on the last couple of moves. Fortunately for me, I did find that there is a single winning path in this position. I don't have to trade queens here, and I can in this position go knight to e6 check. So this knight check is a really pretty move, a dagger in the black position. It's not too complicated because I'm not really sacrificing the knight, right? This is still pinned, so if the pawn captures the knight, then I can take the queen. And if the knight captures over here, then my pawns are massive. Two huge pawns. The queen is under attack. The queen has to move somewhere, and then e7 check is going to win my piece back. My attack continues. It's absolutely crushing for white. So After knight e6 check, my opponent plays king to c8. And in this position, after the king moves over after the knight check, if you hadn't calculated ahead, you might get here and suddenly realize you'd overextended as white. In this position, the knight is pinned. You want to be able to take on f8. There's a free bishop right there. You might want to take on c5, but unfortunately, in this position, the queen is hanging on h3. And that really seems to halt white's attack in this position. Do I have any good continuation now that I've sacrificed a piece and my knight on e6 cannot seem to go anywhere? Am I totally stuck? Well, the answer is that I'm not totally stuck because I have the move knight takes c5. This is the move I was so happy to find in the game. This is a queen sacrifice. Black can take my queen over here on h3. There is nothing defending that queen. But after queen takes h3, which is played in the game, I have this stunner. Rook takes f7. A quiet capture of the pawn while I'm down a queen, and my knight is still hanging right here. But the problem is I'm threatening rook to e8, check and mate. And in this position, with the massive material superiority, a tempo in hand, hanging pieces, there is nothing that black can do. This bishop cannot go anywhere. This rook has no way to defend against rook e8 check, checkmate. This rook has no way to defend against rook e8 checkmate. The queen has a ton of squares and none help. You can come back here and I will just take, I'm now up material and my attack is decisive and your bishop is even trapped. So this is just a winning position. After rook takes f7, my opponent allowed the prettiest checkmate. King to b8, rook to e8 check. By the way, I could go rook b7 check and then rook e8 mate, but much prettier in my opinion is after queen c8, blocking the checkmate, playing this checkmate. The knight on c5 defends the rook on b7. The queen on c8 is pinned and black's king is stuck. What a pretty mating position. I was so happy that the game actually did conclude with this checkmate. There are a couple of other checkmates to see as well. For example, after rook takes f7, black moves the king over trying to block the check. Black could have gone the other way, king to d8. But then there's a different checkmate. Knight b7 check forces the king back, and then rook e8 is checkmate. And after I sacrifice the queen with knight takes c5, it's worth noting that black didn't have to take my sacrificed queen, allowing this rook takes f7 idea. You also should consider pawn takes c5. And honestly, I hadn't calculated the best move here. The best, what I had calculated was rook to e8 check, and then I'm going to win an exchange here because the queen can't take because it's pinned. But even better and much prettier is rook takes f7, insisting on sacrificing the queen. This is just mate in 6 at the most. If black tries really hard to prolong things, the point is queen takes h3, allows again this checkmate with rook to e8, checkmate. So I got to sacrifice a rook on g7. I got to sacrifice a knight on d5 here. I got to sacrifice my queen on h3. I got this beautiful quiet move with rook takes f7, and I got a fantastic finishing checkmate with this pin with rook to b7. This game gave me so much pleasure. I really do think that with a 99.2 accuracy, a queen sacrifice, so many pretty strong, instructive sacrificial moves. This is my new best chess game. I loved getting a chance to play chess like this so much, and I hope that you have enjoyed the game as well.